Thank you for joining us on the Foreseeable Podcast. With us, we have Dr. Mathew Mathews, Principal Research Fellow and Head of the Social Lab at the Institute of Policy Studies at NUS, and Shamil Zainuddin, Research Associate at the Institute of Policy Studies at NUS. We're following up on a recent commentary they wrote that was published in Channel NewsAsia website about the worries over rising COVID-19 cases that they're fueling racially charged comments. And we wanted to follow up and talk a little bit more about that. So thank you too for joining us today. I'd like to start with talking about the incidents of viral videos and some of the incidents of racism that have gone viral and spread on social media and garnered a lot of agitation and anger, and they are kind of upsetting videos. But I wanted to ask both of you if you think that that is signs that there's increasing racism right now, or if these are some of the kinds of underlying incidents that are kind of always been here and they just happen to be caught on an iPhone or smartphone and they were spread that way. Dr. Mathews, would you like to start?
First, I think if you look at the survey data we've been collecting over the last, I'd say, 8-9 years, what we do see is that you do have prejudice in Singapore, you do have discrimination, you do have stereotypes. Essentially, you do have racism in Singapore. However, to see racism as rampant, something which is endemic within society, I think that's questionable. Even in our surveys, what we notice, if you just look at the what minorities mention about encounters with racism, whether it is being upset because they have seen material on social media or mainstream media which upsets them because it insults them, it insults their tradition, their culture, their racial beliefs or religious beliefs. You notice about 20% would say that. So there's a portion who at least say that this happens to them at least sometimes. So that's certainly a significant portion. We cannot run away from that. We do know that there is a portion, maybe about something around 30%, who say that they have been experiencing or they've experienced discrimination in the workforce. So you do know that we have a context where there's a portion, especially among minorities, who do face concerns with this discrimination, racist acts, upset with various kinds of things which have been thrown at them. So you have that underlying. However, of course, the great majority don't experience it. So if you ask the big question, what's the level of racial harmony in Singapore? The great majority rank it high or very high. Now, among minorities, there's a few more who would say moderate. If you've got low, very low, low, moderate, high, very high, you'll find a few more minorities there, but still you've got a very substantial number of minorities who would say is actually very high. So what I would look at when I look at all these figures, and I would say we've always had underlying issues to deal with in terms of racists, those who would be bigoted, those who are, which I think for the great majority is just being ignorant about other people's culture and beliefs and practices. And so that's always been there. However, what you have is, in the most recent times, you've got, of course, a pandemic, obviously exacerbates some things. Things become more evident. People do, sometimes act out a little bit more. And there's also been an increased willingness to share about situations of racism. So I would say that, if you look at the figures we've had, there have always been about 20% who have felt that, they've been subjected to acts of racism. And sometimes we asked that in the last year, for instance. It's just that they for various reasons, they feel that they don't need to make that public. They don't have to put it on social media. But in the more recent times, you've got more people who say, hey, I want to bring this forward. I want people to know this is some of the challenges we deal with. It may not be rampant. It doesn't happen all the time, which is why this needs special attention, and that's why we've put it up.
Shamil, what do you think? Do you agree with that? And do you think that it helps foster a greater communication, or does it just rile people up when they see something that's upsetting on social media?
I mean, surely it riles people up, right? I mean, it's almost like a spectacle. When you see certain really upsetting videos online, and what people can do is to click like or to say something about it. But I would like to add this. I mean, the idea, while it might be 20%, is palpable, right? You can really feel it. 20% is something that perhaps a good number of minorities feel. Perhaps it's not like I would say like hardcore racism, but it is those kind of microaggressions. Some people call it microaggressions. It's those everyday things, that perhaps people, small things, mispronounce your name, this, that, and everything else, speak, certain different language in your presence. But it's just small things that kind of add up. So perhaps social media has allowed for people to sort of air their grievances. And I feel that this idea of sharing kind of helps to normalize and to make it kind of, it seems okay for me to say that these things happen to me. Yeah, so I think that is another factor to think about. Yeah, but it's definitely palpable. Yeah.
Do you think that's a good thing, that people feel more comfortable to share bad experiences that have happened to them? And does it lead to a sense of solidarity amongst minorities, or does it help educate the majority, or what do you think?
Me, yeah. So I think there are 3 points with regard to that kind of question. I think from what I gather, from what people talk about, and I think the first thing is listening. Whether it's good or not, I think we need to listen to some people who say they've been hurt. And I think first thing we need to say, okay, why you hurt? Let's listen to that, and therefore create a bit of space to allow so-called minority voices to say why they hurt, and also to accept the fact that perhaps something might land differently on another person. We might experience things differently, and it's something to take note of. And that's why we create a bit of space, or not a bit, create proper space, so that people can sort of be more inclusive and hear different voices. And number 2 is this idea of allies, right? So you might see a lot of people saying very negative thing about a particular race in event, but there might be those few who actually say, hey, stop saying these things about this can be quite racist, it's quite hurtful, maybe you should stop saying. And I would like to point out like the character Merrick from that interracial couple so-called incident. Merrick seems to be an ally. He stood up when the professor was talking something about religion, and he said, I will not have this. And he stood up and he said, are you okay? He asked the girl, right? So Mary is a nice example of an ally. Yeah. So I mean, and also it seems like it's a game of definition. So you're talking about whether to foster racial harmony, because I feel, if you look at the comments and stuff like that, and that's what we've been looking at. We get comments, how people talk about it. There's a lot of definition. What is racism? What isn't racism? You sound like a racist. You sound like this one. So this idea of definitions, which points to an opportunity. An opportunity to sort of, people want to find out. They're testing out what these definitions are, and if we sort of explore how to talk about these issues properly, then perhaps it can be very positive. Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to the commentary, and then also some of the studies that you already mentioned, like the IPS study that said that 60% of those polled, they were concerned about increased suspicion between people of different social backgrounds as a result of COVID-19. Do you think that is, does that show that there's hope, or that there's like an avenue to try and make things better, that there is some awareness that people can see that, yes, reports of like the COVID-19 virus coming from certain countries may lead to greater suspicion? What did you make of that finding? Dr. Mathews, we can go back to you.
To start off, I think the poll figures just remind us how salient harmony is to many Singaporeans. It's so clear to us that there are forces which may act against the kind of harmony we want to see in Singapore. We do know, based on what we observe elsewhere around the world, we do see instances of disharmony, of pandemics further exacerbating fault lines. And as Singaporeans, I mean, the value to ensure that this space continues to be one which is harmonious, there's cohesion, that every different culture, migrants, everybody can find a good living space here. Those things are very important for many Singaporeans. And so when you see that concern that they have about potential, I mean, that the pandemic can cause these rifts, I think that I see that as a healthy sign. I see that people do know that this can happen. Of course, the great majority will always say, I mean, well, it can happen, other people's actions, not mine. So it takes one more step for us to be able to look at ourselves and say, I can be the bigoted person, I can be ignorant about others and other groups. But it is certainly a healthy start to that. People are open.
And that brings us to another finding that you mentioned in the commentary, that 1 in 4 respondents reported themselves becoming more negative about immigrants, or noticing that within themselves, including those from India, because of the pandemic. So what does that mean to you, that there is at least 25% of people that have that kind of self-awareness, and does that lead to instances of self-policing in a way?
To start off with, I'm glad for 25% who probably, I wouldn't use the word I'm glad for that, but
at least it's 25%, right?
I mean, it's hard to, to look at that figure. There's just two ways of looking at it. One is, of course, that it is self-awareness about what is happening. The other is also that it's also an opportunity for them to say, yeah, I have become more and more upset, and I have right reasons to be upset with these migrant groups for a variety of reasons, which maybe the pandemic has heightened their awareness about some of the potential flaws of migrants. And, suddenly this sense that, I mean, we as a community are good, but the new guys coming in, they've got these flaws. So, I mean, certainly there is a portion that I think people are aware, and I think that's helpful. But I would also say that there is a portion who just, the pandemic has stoked increased negative sentiments among them. Hopefully with that, when people sense that they are becoming more and more negative about a group, something will kick in, that they'll feel that, maybe I should do a little bit more exploration, find out, I should ask myself, why do I have these prejudices? Why am I so upset with this group? And go beyond just looking at it from the point that there is essentially a group of people who are bad and who have got lots of negativity surrounding them. And to look at the broader picture and try to understand. Sometimes really, I think as we've mentioned in the commentary, the main grouses we have sometimes are about policy. Perhaps policies about who should be admitted, what number of people should be admitted to our country, especially during a pandemic, whether our borders should be tightened. So those might be the bigger questions, but somehow or other, that has brought also another set of upsetness and fears about a particular group. So hopefully people can be discerning and try to tease those things apart.
Yeah, Shamil, did you want to say something?
No, I just want to echo Matthew's point. I think the major sort of point of our op-ed was this idea of, let's talk about policies. We can agree or disagree about the policies, but let's leave the head at the door. Let's talk about the policies, and there's nothing wrong with talking about policies. And the idea of awareness, I think, as they say, right, you need to, the first step to change is also to be aware, right, not be in denial. So if you are aware and so-called admit to your issues, right, then something can happen with regard to recovery. I mean, recovery, if we use a medical term. Yeah, so the fact that they're aware is very promising, and then we can move forward.
Yeah.
If you are not aware that you're doing something, that is the problem actually, and so it is useful that the people are aware.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the importance of people like speaking up and using their voice, like on social media, where even if if you see someone espousing a racist view, even if you're one of the only ones, it helps to make a comment saying, no, that's not right. I don't believe that. It's based on misinformation. Tell me more about how you feel that matters, and how does that help the situation overall?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
When we put up those, you tend to have often in social media posts, you've got, comment after comment, perhaps vilifying a particular group. And somebody needs to come in to put some perspective and context to that. Now, by doing that, when people start to come in and say, well, maybe there's inaccurate facts, we've not been carefully thinking about it. What that does is that, of course, it raises the conscience of other people who are also going through the set of comments or reacting. Many people do know what is good behavior. They know that it's not right to just with broad brush strokes completely wipe out a whole group of people. They know it's not the proper thing to do, but that's what's emotive. That's what happens when there's already quite a bit of upsetness and hatred. And so when those who believe in the cause of harmony, understand why it's important to respect people of different backgrounds, come in and make those statements, that raises people's conscience. Now, sometimes people do fight against that. If you're the one who, tries to put some balance, you do get others just upset with what you're saying. But it certainly does something to how people think about the situation. Hopefully it would also give others, and many people sit in the fence, they probably have they know that perhaps the discussion has just gone wrong and we've just got into hatred. And they would want to say, but they don't feel competent enough to echo those statements. Perhaps somebody taking the lead to it, others joining in, can completely change how everybody who is reading that, thousands of people reading that particular article or set of posts have a better sense and say, well, it's not, they're clearly another side which we should think about.
And Shamil, is that also like the idea of enforcing social norms? Like if people see that there's someone else willing to stand up and that it can make them feel like it's okay to stand up as well, and kind of combat the other social norm, which is on the internet, that you can say anything about anyone with no consequences, which is kind of the damage. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I think it allows me to highlight the number of like really ground up initiatives out there that came up during this pandemic, right, to help vulnerable groups. Like really commendable efforts out there, from translation services to food to here and a lot to like sewing your own masks, right? So we see a lot of that, the kind of great things, and that has kind of normalized it, right? Even podcasts, number of podcast people are talking about things, it's it kind of normalizes it, and the idea of helping. In fact, I would like to see our own commentary as an example of trying to be an ally, right, to those who are vulnerable or who are perhaps abused or hurt. And and it goes without saying that even us saying this something in commentary, also we would get the two of us got some kind of negative comments online, about perhaps our own background or race or whatever. So and we were really happy when that few people, right, actually stood up and say, hey, Mathew, Shamil, it's okay, Mathew, Shamil, not say it's okay, but I'm sorry for you to feel that way. And it's great. So because if let's say someone is abused and you kind of keep quiet, right, you might be, people might see it as, the person who's being abused might not appreciate your silence, right?
Yeah.
You might meet that one
Okay.
person who says, hey, Shamil, ignore this 1,001 people, they might be listening, but you're okay, just checking up on you, you're all right, hopefully. Yeah, so it matters. And maybe like what Matthew said, which is a great point, another person might come in and say, yeah, hey, stop bullying this person. But the important thing is let's not go into personal attacks. Right, let's keep it to the facts. Like, okay, this is wrong and everything. Let's not say, hey, you whatever, like, because you can go very emotional online. But let's not go into that kind of degrade into that level, and then you're almost the same level as the person who actually did the views, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And were there any other specific like ground up initiatives that you wanted to talk about that you thought was a really positive sign? Anything that you wanted to share?
Matthew. Yeah.
I mean, one thing during the whole pandemic, you realize how much ground up work among migrant workers. And I mean, now migrant workers, I mean, there are many other issues revolving around treatment of migrant workers and protection for them. But certainly, many Singaporeans decided that they would get up and very often migrant workers are of a different race. I mean, we do know that many of those in the dorms are of South Asian backgrounds, for instance, and many Singaporeans are ethnic Chinese. But yeah, there was an outpouring of interest, of care, all kinds of provisions done to perhaps better the lives of migrant workers. So you do see people trying to counter what could have been the racist response to then just say, well, they deserve it, it's because of their culture. That's why so many of them are infected by the virus. But no, many Singaporeans stepped up to help.
Yeah.
Very good. And that brings us to the next, moving from ground up interventions to government or policy interventions. I mean, Singapore does, I think, more to promote racial harmony than any other government that I've seen. I don't know if they're actually at the top, but they certainly do a lot of interventions to promote racial harmony. But what about during times like this, where there's an extra pressure from outside, like the pandemic, that could be causing more problems? Is there anything that the government has done or could do to kind of treat this crisis, if maybe that's too strong a word, but this particular instance of xenophobia and racism? Shamil, you want to take that?
I think for one, this idea of I wouldn't say allowing, but this idea of let me use the word allow, right? This idea of allowing this podcasts and stuff, right, to happen. The number of podcasts, workshops, webinars that are happening at this period of time, and without much censorship, or it is fantastic, right? People are talking about it in a very peaceful manner, and I think that is probably a good policy. Maybe I would say perhaps a calibrated kind of move, but allowing people to talk, right? I would say that there's more allowance for. Straits Times talked about racism the other day, but 5 pages of it. I think it's a good sign to allow this kind of conversation, and perhaps to maybe intervene when it's a bit too much, when people are getting hurt. Yeah. So I think maybe the policy would be to allow people to talk a bit more. Yeah, and sort of so I think that's a good sign.
I would say right from the start, if you look at it from a government comms perspective, communication about in many of that, it probably has come up from either ground sensing efforts very early in the pandemic, as early as when visitors from China would come in, and there were concerns about them. People used the term Wuhan virus and began to have feelings about migrant Chinese in Singapore. You already have various attempts by the state to try to speak about the issue, remind Singaporeans that the virus does not have a nationality and ethnic background. It's here to harm all of us who live in this island. So that communication came out very early. Of course, with that, there were a lot of opinion pieces, there were different kind of statements. So there was a very intentional effort to remind Singaporeans, those who live here, that there is good behavior that we can demonstrate during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We need to leverage on social trust, because if we don't have social trust, then it's harder to deal and win get through the pandemic. So you've had that mentioned throughout the period and during the periods of xenophobia. There were several times where xenophobic reactions were stoked during the pandemic, and you do get the government to come out, and of course that amplifies to many Singaporeans here that the matter is of concern, that the government does come up to say these are not actions which are acceptable. Now, of course, we don't want only the government to speak or the state to speak, and the ground up bodies, others who will also need to speak and should make this clear. But I think it's very important from a government communications point of view that there's an effort to bring out. Just recently, some of the situations are more racist situations. Have even seen the Prime Minister come up and make a statement that some of these actions are just not acceptable within our country. I think that's important. It clearly puts out to Singaporeans what is expected in life here.
Mm-hmm. And internationally, what about things like the World Health Organization choosing Greek letters for different virus variants to try and move away from calling it the Wuhan virus or South Africa variant, things like that? Does that language help? And is that enough, or is it really up to just the different news agencies to report it correctly around the world?
Shamil, did you want to say something about just now? I saw you unmute, so
Oh, right. No, I just wanted to add, thank you very much, Mathew. I just wanted to add this idea of the government and people in general recognizing essential workers as well, right? I mean, this is the period of time we saw, and this has a nice implication with regard to the idea of meritocracy and everything else, because these are people sometimes would see at so-called the bottom of the vulnerable groups, whether delivery riders, and now they are essential workers, people who are, helping us move along and survive in this period. That itself is signs, to me at least, sends a clear message to those people out there, that you are there's some kind of gratitude, you're kind of recognized. Of course, we can do more, but this pandemic has allowed us to give more credit to those who probably where credit is due. So because we're at home, or in offices a day out there, right, delivering our food and whatnot, and of course nurses every day. So I think that itself is important to note. With regard to the naming, I think it's a good start. People might say, yeah, this is like really a small thing, just change the name. No, but I think as we all know, labels matter. Labels matter, and unfortunately, or people have been labeled certain things, and others have acted upon those labels, and it can hurt. So this sends a nice, clear signal that let us think before we label others, or paint the entire group with a brush in a certain way. Because that's how stereotypes happen, and we saw how Wuhan virus and Indian variant. It can be hurtful for some of these people.
When we first wrote our first op-ed at the start of the virus, and it was still the Wuhan virus, so we noted that. But we were thinking about the fact that all throughout the last couple of years, when you have different kinds of pandemics, MERS, for instance, is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. If I'm not wrong, 1 or 2 other pandemics. We will talk about the Spanish flu, for instance. So it seemed to me that was a nomenclature that was commonplace. It was all right to mention that. But today, when we look at the impact of such labels, we realize that really is misplaced logic. It's just not. There is an effect on the labels you use. And we might. It is so much better that when we just label them in alphabets, Delta, or different Greek alphabets, so much better. And I think I'm sure it in itself may not completely remove all the xenophobia we have seen in more recent years or recent months because of parents that come from different places, because there's already been a tradition. We started off calling this the Indian mutant or South African. But hopefully all this will help us be better prepared for the next pandemic, that we're careful and allay some of these potential traps.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to add another point. I think Matthew, you might remember that that while we were writing this particular commentary, I think you mentioned, should we talk about this in this particular commentary as well? And we thought, okay, maybe we'll write another one to talk directly about the labeling. But fortunately enough, WHO already came out with something. So it's definitely something that we were thinking about as well. Yeah.
Very good. Well, finally, I would kind of like to ask both of you how you would compare the Singapore situation to some of the other instances of racism and anti-Asian sentiment in places like the United States or France, which are also, getting a lot of attention right now. Dr. Mathews, would you like to start, and then Shamil, you can follow up?
Some of the anti-Asian actions which have been happening in some parts of the world, I have been fueled by lots of rhetoric about, for instance, the virus, the place, the origin of the virus, and locating in Asia. And I think that has not helped. And of course, much of that rhetoric comes with other, there's been a lot more conversation about perhaps, just the fear of migrants, how migrants are upsetting the status quo in many cities, bringing in new culture, new practices, but maybe more fundamentally, just they become an economic competitor. And when your rice bowl is affected, you get very upset. And so it's really a manifestation of those who are perhaps nativists or others who have very, very strong feelings that Asians have gone beyond their shores and are trying to economically dominate different places. And then, of course, then the reaction is one of hate to try to keep as many away from this particular society. So that's very sad. I'm very, very fortunate that in Singapore, that kind of rhetoric is not accepted. There are other places based on notions of free speech. You can get into very long, substantial discourses blaming particular groups and saying all kinds of very nasty things about them. Fortunately, the laws here do stop that kind of discourse. And this is a place where you notice that perhaps you do need some freedom, some limits to potential freedom, especially when that freedom causes you to, rant and be bigoted and hurt a large group of people. And of course, subsequently, what you have is you fuel a certain kind of rhetoric and perspective, and then some take it one level further in terms of actual acts of violence. So this, I think in the Singapore case, there's been that protection because you don't have, for instance, a very far-right, anti-immigrant type of rhetoric, which has been allowed. Right. And that's been taken care of, curbed. You cannot have, public expressions of it, at least. So, of course, you do have people commenting on social media and being upset, but it doesn't get, for instance, into mainstream media. It doesn't get into a day-to-day discourse. Political parties, generally don't use such rhetoric. So we're fortunate in that regard. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important distinction. I think that has saved us some of those concerns. The other thing, of course, is I would say, if you want to deal with anti-immigrant, even racist type of expressions, one, of course, is the general, broader, the rule of law that helps limit some kinds of actions. It's also the attempt that has been ongoing within society to deal with prejudices and bigotry and insensitivity. Singapore has worked on it in various ways. I mean, just our community housing or public housing, where you do have the Malay and the Indian and the Chinese, the Eurasian and the others, all living in close proximity to each other. Reduction of enclaves. All these are very important because it has taught people in Singapore that, even if I am upset with one particular person, there are many others who live around me from this particular racial or immigrant background who are actually very nice people. And so I need to learn how to put that in perspective and learn to appreciate, learn to live and let live, learn to understand that they're also human and they're good people. Society is much better when all of us collaborate rather than compete against each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so broadly, of course, the policing, the attempt to build harmonious relationships through interactions, and of course, and of course, bigger than that, is the idea that social policy needs to be robust enough to try to deal with the fallouts that can come from any risky or uncertain season. So, when people are worried about their rice bowl or their livelihood, if there's not enough injection of support, government assistance to those who need it, then anxiety goes up. And of course, when anxiety goes up, then the other becomes more and more vilified.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you put all those together, that makes it a lot easier to deal with pandemics and reduce or curb the kind of anti-immigrant racist type of expressions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some very good points. U.S. and France, you have entire political arms that are generating anti-immigrant message all the time, without it, without any kind of check. Shamil, what do you think about the comparison between Singapore and some Western countries?
Yeah, I think because of this pandemic, right, we are kind of exposed to the kind of, we see the raw realities of the different societies of various countries, Singapore and US and other places, and we see, not just how, for example, the healthcare service can withstand such a pandemic, and we see how Singapore has done very well. We need to take our hats off to our healthcare workers and system itself, to sort of keep us safe. So and also how our sort of the kind of social interactions, right, on the kind of a health check about our social relations. And you see in those countries, it seems that there's not that there are really, really hardcore, deep-seated issues, and we've seen violence happening over there. And thankfully enough, we do not see that kind of violence in Singapore. Of course, that we had that kind of rights previously, long time ago, but now we have not seen it, right, compared to other places. But I would like to say that, while we have not seen violence, but I think we have to, reiterate the point. There is still a palpable amount of problems, basically, with regard to social interaction, ideas of each other, that we need to solve. And I think this COVID has allowed us to sort of shine a light on it and do something about it. Like we're doing something about, for example, migrant workers dormitory and everything. We're doing something about, and when I say we, it's not just government. I think it's a collective. We are doing something about it. And I think I echo Mathew's point. We've been living with each other in this super diverse island, right? One of the most diverse islands or countries in the world, with relative harmony compared to any other country, I feel. And during this period of time, we see how we sort of help each other or talk about each other or say, hey, let's not talk about this kind of thing about another person. And I think it is great. But we also need to say this. There are perhaps people who have been hurt, right, by where we immigrants, migrants, and whatnot, and they feel hurt. Probably they face a rude person who from a non-local born person, or rude, or get this. They have been hurt, and we're not trying to diss them. We're not trying to say, hey, you're lying. You've never heard all immigrants are great. No, there are rude Malays, rude Indian, rude whatever, rude people in general, right? We're just saying that perhaps you do not have the sample size might be a bit small. I know it's left a bad taste in your mouth, but let's not paint the entire population. We're talking about billions of people with one stroke, right? And to make it even more easy to understand, we would not want other people to paint us that way, right? Based on one interaction by another person, we want to paint the entire population that way. So I think, yeah. So let us move forward, but not dismiss how people have felt about it. Yeah, but I just want to say to those people who have been hurt and everything else, let us not paint an entire population with some kind of negative brush, right? So let's talk about policy and not so much people per se.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. I think that's really well said. I think that's probably a pretty good place to end it. Dr. Mathews, was there anything else you wanted to add? No? Okay. Well,
Sounds good.
very good. Well, I want to thank both of you for your commentary and for the work that you're doing in this area. And yeah, I hope that people can continue to learn and discuss and be allies, and that we can all live together happily here on this diverse little island. So thanks everyone for listening, and I appreciate it. Goodbye.